to examine two Paramount Hasbro movies that ultimately failed. Here are my complaints, my thoughts. Let's get into it. The Last Night, the worst of Transformers. Is there a legacy? I don't think so. This film has brought nothing revolutionary. The Knights, who cares? Dragonstorm, who cares? Quintessa, disconnected. I feel like she's in her own world. She really has no dimension whatsoever. There's no interface to the character, and it will be no shock if anybody ever remembers her. The theme of the night doesn't really carry that great in this movie. And the fact that the last night is actually Kay Yeager, Mark Wahlberg's character, that's just pathetic. The human factor is just too great in this film. It overtakes everything that the Transformers should be about. That's one of the reasons why this is really the worst one. So here I ask, what legacy? Why continue from this crud? Especially those who wanted a sequel to this film. Because setting Unicron as the Earth is just bad. Vinny Unicron from Transforming, who wants to see that? People want to see Unicron in his robot mode causing devastation. And thus, when Transformers Rise of the Beast introduced Unicron as his own separate entity, I was happy. Because we get to see Unicron as he should be. Not that crud as him being the Earth. And I just see that these decisions are just empty. It doesn't really go anywhere. Just as I feel like in this movie that they just made a lot of shortcuts. They just slapped the name Nemesis Prime on Optimus Prime because he's bad. I felt that there was just a lot of cheap stuff added, from character designs to certain choices. When they just introduced the Decepticons only for scenes later for them to easily be swept under the rug, and then the next thing they had TIE Fighter looking drones following Kay Yeager, taking up most of the screen time. I mean, what is this? What is this? Why do I feel like I'm being cheated? Having stuff like that aggravates me because I just want to see these robots fight for longer periods of time, and you just skip to just some human shenanigans, and people pay money to see that, but they're not getting it. And I mean, just what's with the lack of dedication towards the right stuff? And that's why people feel like these movies are longer than what they should be, because you spend time on stuff that doesn't really matter, and The Last Night had a lot of that. This is like the opposite of first Transformers film. When I see the first Transformers film, it's just good. The more you see it, the more you appreciate it. But The Last Night, it's the complete opposite. The more you see it, the more you get irritated with the decisions. And I can be aggravated because for those who've been loyal to this movie franchise since the beginning, having this makes it all feel like an insult. Because let me be honest, I thought it was going to go somewhere after the ending of Age of Extinction with Optimus Prime jetting out into space, so I can make a solid list of things that this movie disappointed me in. Like a real solid list. And a lot of people was just tired, and the box office showed. And it took time to reveal that to us. Michael Bay confessed that he made too many of them, but I felt like he was just so dedicated to the franchise now. That is why he is still a producer, and he has a say. The Last Night made a little bit over $600 million, and that is around $500 million less than what Age of Extinction made. So Paramount had to take hard knocks to get the picture. $605 million. It may well be on its breaking even point, but it was a great step down. What does this say? People are tired. They were tired. The interest wasn't there, and the film couldn't spark any more interest. It just irritated people even more. And some people might have even theorized that maybe Michael Bay just sabotaged the movie. But the main issue is that Paramount treated these movies like how Disney treats Marvel and Star Wars, thinking that they can make as many as they can without the thought of quality. And people just eat it up. That's just a blasted, awful perspective to place on a generally smart idea of a franchise. Robots that transform into vehicles and other machines, and having conflict, trying to destroy one another. That's simple as a premise, but with this sort of extra luggage that is the human factor that weighs it down, people are just deterred by that stuff, and I really am repelled by that as well. And with these just big budgets, it can be really done if you just focus on what matters. Putting the CGI where it's worth. There was decisions with the CGI that wasn't necessary. You could have made toys off of characters that were worth it, Hasbro. Spend time animating what was worth it. Because some of the stuff just didn't really carry over. It didn't matter in the latter part of the movie. The beginning battle, the knights being established, meant nothing in the overall movie. Paramount had to take this loss as something for them to learn from. But this isn't the only Hasbro property film that they lost from. Another movie that they lost from is Snake Eyes G.I. Joe Origins. And talk about G.I. Joe in name only. This film doesn't really represent G.I. Joe well. It is better than the previous films in delivery, but Snake Eyes was better in those films. Much better. And and G.I. Joe was represented much better. At least they got the Baroness right in this movie, have her actually be Russian, but ultimately for the most part this movie falls flat for being G.I. Joe. Rise of Cobra and Retaliation was just better at being G.I. Joe. They felt more like G.I. Joe. If you was to line these movies up with the original G.I. Joe content. And the greatest issue of this movie is that it removes him from the mystique that makes him special. He's one of those characters that less is more from him. Falls into the same sort of problem that the Book of Boba Fett has, having too much of what people don't usually associate with the character. Boba Fett rarely spoke. Snake Eyes doesn't even speak at all. In this movie, like, what does it even tell? At the end of the movie, it was a better story for telling the origin of Storm Shadow than Snake Eyes himself. Shoot, you wind up feeling more for Storm Shadow and his intentions than Snake Eyes. Like, what's up with that? And in this movie, he doesn't even lose his voice. He doesn't get scarred. I mean, he just had this obsession with revenge. That's fine, I guess. That puts him on a character journey. The final act of this movie, though, with the powerful out-of-place family heirloom that shoots fire, that felt so forced. The movie was grounded with ninjas and soldiers. It had more realistic grounds. Then all of a sudden, the family heirloom shoots fire. I feel like this is not the film that should have that. It can exist in G.I. Joe, but this was not the film for it. Sometimes you can forget that you're watching a G.I. Joe film because it's only focusing on a guy that is yet to become Snake Eyes. I mean, what does a origin story really do for the character? The origin of Snake Eyes in the first G.I. Joe movie, Rise of Cobra, did it much better. I even remember G.I. Joe Renegade. It aired alongside Transformers Prime, but there was a couple episodes telling Snake Eyes' origin. It didn't have to be long and drawn out. And this is where the problem lies. The reason why that this movie was made was because Snake Eyes is a popular character.
It took a long time to convince everybody. Brian Goldner and Hasbro and I always thought that Snake Eyes was going to make the great character and the great movie out of it, in part because he's the most popular character in the G.I. Joe universe.
Bruh.
And I think this is the only reason that the movie was made. There's nothing wrong with making movies about popular characters, but if you're trying to make a movie about a popular character and there's nothing really to it, then it's just a waste of money, and people gotta know that's all what it is. A cheap cash grab. These companies are ambitious with these properties, but how do they really capture the audience? Sure, a couple people might see it, but what would draw in many people? And that brings us to Transformers and G.I. Joe crossing over. To me personally, it can work to a degree. One thing I believe is that G.I. Joe is going to reach a point to Transformers. They're not equals. There's a reason why Transformers have more movies and more TV shows. So how would this work? If you have failed with G.I. Joe and some people still aren't on board with the Transformers, how would this crossover work? It might get some eyebrows raised. I think people are willing to give it a shot once, but many other people just won't really see this as a one-up because they kind of already saw it with Nest and Revenge of the Fallen and Dark of the Moon. The Autobots pairing up with the military isn't something new. Is that the best that it's going to be? Hasbro and G.I. Joe. And if you're going to go in just trying to make a pair-up, hopefully you do it right, because people aren't new to pair-ups nowadays. We have the Avengers and Justice League, and people haven't really responded well to Justice League, the first version, so you can't use the pair-ups as a gimmick and expect it to be successful. A lot of people aren't attached to G.I. Joe like it used to be. Some people might remember Scarlet, Duke, Roadblock, Flint, Lady J, Cobra Commander, Destro, the Baroness, Storm Shadow, Snake Eyes, but how many more? You will have to really dedicate to the source material and not do whatever these past G.I. Joe movies did. And then you will have to let that fit in with the Transformers. So there, that's a challenge. People don't give these movies the benefit of their own skeptical perspective. And ultimately, people just want to see the robots fight. Many people ask for a Transformers movie without the humans. That's one thing I wish I had even more of in Rise of the Beast. It had more than that crew that was in the last night, but people just want more. So the last night, Snake Eyes, there's a story to tell. And that story is telling me Paramount need to handle the property that was given to them better. Or you're going to get failures like the last night, Snake Eyes, even to an extent, Rise of the Beast. Because Rise of the Beast is something they want to make more money from. They didn't want to make just a little over $430 million. It's the lowest grossing installment of the franchise. They want more to that. So to speak this out, this is more so a gimmick than a bright idea. They think this is insightful, but ultimately this is just something to save a franchise. G.I. Joe. You can course correct with Transformers. It has its own notoriety. But G.I. Joe, you need a lot more fuel. That's why I think the crossover will do more in service of G.I. Joe than Transformers. Whatever, Paramount is just going to do what a corporation does. Expect many more Sonic movies in the future. This is Lights 126 saying, till all are one.